Welcome back to Plugin Teardowns, episode 2, where open source bubble plugins get a deep review. We dive into the code, see how it ticks, uncovering its secrets with some neat tricks. Today's star is the Loom API. We'll break it down, see how and why. Real-time analysis, clear as day. Join us as we decode on this beautiful day. In this series, I'm looking at open source plugins on the Bubble Marketplace to figure out how they work in real time by analyzing the plugin code. If you haven't seen the first video, I would highly recommend checking that out. You can find it on our YouTube channel. We'll make sure to put a link somewhere. Okay, so today we're looking at the free and open source Loom API plugin. It's a very simple but very interesting plugin. It's a recently released plugin which lets you fetch the transcript and comments from any public Loom video. The reason this plugin is interesting is because Loom technically doesn't have a public API. Meaning there's no official way to get this data from any Loom video, but the plugin still works. The reason this works is because it relies on the unofficial GraphQL API, which we partially reverse engineered to create this plugin. We'll spend a bit of time in this video showing you exactly how that works. I've got a few tabs open, and the first tab that I have open is actually the marketplace listing for this plugin. Just as a quick reminder, anytime a plugin is free, it means by default it is open source, which means you can click on the plugin and there will be this link over here, which is called See Plugin Code, which will take you to the plugin editor and you will be able to see the code that the plugin contains and any other configuration. There's also a few other tabs that I have open. So first of all, there's the plugin demo. Over here, there's the actual editor of the demo. So this is the Bubble app. And then lastly, there's the plugin editor for this plugin, which we accessed by clicking this link over here. Let's start by checking out the demo to see what this plugin even does. Now, it is in my opinion that any decent plugin should have both a really good demo and at least some documentation in any form. So make sure that if you're building a plugin to include those. This plugin seems simple enough. Let's just quickly click on the docs to see what it tells us. And it's basically just telling us, hey, put in a link, run the action, and you will get back data. So that's what we're going to do. Let's see. First of all, we're just going to quickly copy paste this Loom link to see what it points to. And we can see that it points to a public Loom that I recorded to talk about something else. And it's a really good demo because it contains a few comments. So we should be getting some comments back after running the fetch action. So let's go back to the demo to actually do that. Okay, so the action ran and we can see that we got two things back from the action. One is the actual transcript and the comments. We got also a list of comments over here. And those should match the comments that are in the Loom, which we'll quickly check. And we can see that there are comments over here, and they definitely do. Let's now look at the transcript. If I click on this link, it's going to take me to a new tab, and it's going to have the transcript in JSON format. This is how Loom stores the transcript. Okay, so it's very simple. You put in a link, and you get back data. Let's see how this works in the editor. All right, so we're now inside of the Bubble editor for the actual demo app. This is publicly accessible, by the way. I already located the button that we just clicked in the demo, this little fetch button. Anything else is just makeup. This is where the actual magic happens. So let's click this button and click Edit Workflow to figure out what is happening behind the scenes. We can see that it's workflow with a bunch of steps. And the first step is setting a state, which is just setting a loading state to yes. So this is just for the UI. And then it's doing the API call and it's doing another API call. So it's doing two separate API calls, one to fetch the transcript and one to fetch the comments. So that's good to know that the plugin has two API calls. And then at the end, it's storing the result into a state so that we can show it on the page. And then at the very end, it's just putting the loading state back on no so that the UI can be updated again. This seems simple enough, so I think it's time to dive into the actual plugin itself to see how it's set up. All right, people, we made it to the plugin editor. Honestly, this kind of feels like my second home at this point. So let's quickly go over the sections to see which parts of the plugin editor are used for this specific plugin. I usually like to just click around very fast, so I will click on shared. I will see that there's nothing here, so I'll just ignore the section. I will click on API calls. I will see that there's stuff here. We'll get back here in a minute. I'll click on elements. I can see that it's empty, so we can ignore this section as well. Same goes for actions. We can ignore it. Settings is just settings. And reviews is going to be empty because no one is using my plugins. So let's go to API calls, and we can see something very interesting right off the bat. And this is something that has always confused me at the start, but now I kind of understand it. And it is this. Why is there two API calls that are the same, right? If you look at the actual code inside of here, you will see that it is indeed exactly the same as this one. So there's two get transcripts here and there's two get comments here. Now, the reason that there's two here is because there's one slight difference. And the slight difference is this little drop down over here that says use as, right? So you can pick whether or not you want a API call to show up under the data section or as an action in the plugin editor. I'm pretty sure there used to be an option here that said something like both, because very often you want to have both options. But for some reason they got rid of it. And the way to work around that now is by having a duplicate of your API call in every API plugin that you're building. So if you have one API call, you need twice the amount of API calls, just so that you can put one on data and one on action, right? Now, what does this achieve? It's actually very simple. There's multiple ways you can use an API call in the bubble editor. I'll quickly show you. So this is an action, right? We're in workflow. If I click here, it's going to show up if I do something like Loom API. So these are actions that it's doing, right? But this is not the only way you can use an API call in Bubble. You can also do it in the UI. For example, if you want to set a groups type, like this one, I can set the type of content to get comment from the Loom API. This is only going to show up if my plugin exposes it as data. All right, so if I remove this one, only the actions will be there. Vice versa, if I remove the actions, only this data one will be there. So usually you want to give the user both options. So if you're building a plugin that is an API call plugin, just make sure to, at the end, duplicate it, flip this little switch to action if you already created the data one, right? Okay, let's check the get transcript API call first. Right off the bat, we see something interesting. It's doing an API call to something that ends on /grapqhl. So we'll take note of that. Okay, we can also see that it's sending a JSON body, and there's only one part that we're replacing over here. It's the video ID. This over here is the Loom video ID. So anything else is just setup that is required to do this call. GraphQL works a little bit different, but in the end, it is just a regular HTTP API call. It's just a different way of doing an API call. They basically allow you to send a query, so you can decide what kind of data you want in what kind of format, and you can be very specific. You can say, I want this field, and I want it in this shape, but I don't want this field. It's what Loom uses, right, in their front end. So this is a very simple API call. Let's show you how we actually got this, because this is something that isn't documented. We found out how this works by reverse engineering how Loom shows the actual comments and the actual transcript on their page. Okay, so this is the Loom video that is used in the demo. Now, we're going to do something. We're going to go ahead and open up the developer tools. I'm going to right click, inspect, and we're going to go to one of my favorite places in the browser. It's the network tab, right? First thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to quickly clear out any existing requests, and then I'm just going to refresh the page while my sidebar is open, right? This is going to do something very interesting. It's going to show you all of the API calls that this Loom web page is making to any source, right? So it might do an API call to the Loom server to get this page, but it might also do an API call to some analytics server or Google Fonts to load a Google font. And there's a few in here that are going to be this API call, because Loom needs to fetch comments so that they can show it on their page. They need to fetch the transcript so that they can show it over here. And this is a public page. Anyone that can access this link can see the comments and views. That is ultimately the biggest clue that allowed us to build this plugin, because we knew that if you can, without authentication, see the comments and see the transcript, it means that all we have to do is find which API call is the one that is fetching that data, and we can make the exact same API call from the Bubble plugin. So there's this handy filter button over here. I'm just going to type GraphQL, and it's going to filter out any request that doesn't have the GraphQL in it. We know it's a GraphQL API call because we can see in the plugin that this is the request that it's doing. It's doing a post to loom.com/GraphQL. All of these are API calls to GraphQL, and all of them fetch a different type of data, because Loom is using this to display anything that's on the page, right? So we're going to click on the first request, and I just like to quickly cycle using my arrow keys while looking at this response tab to see if I find something that's interesting. We're going to go down until we can see the one that returns the actual transcript. And yeah, we can see that this is the request that returns the actual transcript. Okay, so let's compare the API call for fetching the transcript between the plugin editor and the web page. Okay, so we can see that the operation name is fetch video transcript. We already saw that before. And if we now go back to the tab, we found the API call, the exact API call. We can see loom.com/grapqhl post, and then the payload is the same. It's operation fetch video transcript, and then the query is going to be the same. Then the variables are going to also be the same because this is the same video, right? So the response is a data with this object and some filler words, and somewhere there's going to be a link to the actual transcript. Yes, this one. It's going to be transcript URL, and there's going to be source URL. That's the one that we actually want to display in the app, right? So we're going to go to the plugin editor, and we're going to copy the same video ID just to make sure that the API call is the same one. I'm going to put it there, and I'm going to reinitialize the call. And we can see that we get back a JSON response. So the API call that the Loom web page is making is also working from the Bubble plugin. And if I scroll down, you can see we're getting back the data, the fetch video transcript like here, and we're getting back the source URL, which is the same as this one. So that proves that it's possible to reverse engineer an API call as long as it's possible to make that API call without needing authentication, which is not necessary in this case. And you can do the same API call from Bubble. Alright, lovely people, that's going to be it for the second installment of the plugin teardown series. Please leave a comment with any thoughts or questions you might have. I would love to answer them. And please leave a comment with what plugin you think we should review next. See you next time. Cheers.